Dear viewers across the world, most welcome to my channel NAGA World Conflict Zone. Context: Israel is the apartheid country where 2021 mourner pray over the bodies of 17 Palestinians who were killed in overnight Israeli air raids in Gaza City on May 16, 2021. Sanat Lotifa, creditor. In 2019, I wrote a piece for Al Jazeera in which I reiterated that we Palestinians of Gaza have already made our choice. We will not die a slow and dishonorable death while thanking our killers and laboring under the self-deceptions that portrays slavery to the occupier as a fait accompli. Our struggle is non-sectarian, one that is enshrined in the basic principles of the International Declarations on Human Rights, no matter how hard the hypocritical Western media tries to conceal the truth. And now apartheid Israel has decided to launch yet another murderous campaign of bombardment against one of the most densely populated area on earth, the Gaza Strip. Again, the victims include innocent civilians, children, women, and men. Some 200 Palestinians have been killed, including 40 children. On May 15, dozens of Palestinians were massacred in Al-Wahda streets in downtown Gaza City alone. Medical staff have also not been spared. On May 16, Dr. Ayan Abu Alaouf, head of the Internal Medical Department of the Al-Shifa Medical Complex, was killed along with most of his family. With the American-made F-16 fighter jet, Israel has bombed and flattened dozens of residential buildings and hundreds of homes. Ambulance and civil defense crews have been attempting for days now to retrieve Palestinians who have been buried by rubble, some using their mobile phones to call for help before taking their last breath. The message is very clear to us. It is civilian that Israel is after. Once again, apartheid Israel has deployed its long-standing dire doctrine, a blueprint for massacre and devastating outlined by Gadi Eisenkot, head of the Army's Northern Divisions, after the 2006 Israeli war on Lebanon. Having decimated the dire neighborhood of Beirut with a vicious 34-day air bombardment, Elsnok declared that what happened in the Dahiya quarter of Beirut in 2006 will happen in every village from which Israel is fired on. From our standpoint, these are not civilian villages, they are military bases. In other words, every resident of Gaza, even a day-old baby, is a legitimate military target for Israel. The ultimate goal of the Israelis is to brutalize Palestinians into submissions, into giving up any resistance any claim to their own land. As former Defense Minister Musa Yalon said in 2002, for the Israeli army victory would be seared into the Palestinians and Arab consciousness that terrorism and violence will not defeat us. As with previous massacres, this time once again Israel and the Palestinians, the oppressor and the oppressed, are equated as two sides to a conflict, and what constitutes legitimate resistance under international law is put on the same level as a brutal illegal occupations. US President Joe Biden says apartheid Israel has the right to defend itself. The fact that Israel has the actual army, disproportionately greater firepower, and is an occupier is neglected as usual, as is the stark difference in the death toll. Biden, Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel, and other Western leaders and their house arrows are just incapable of seeing the humanity of Palestinians. Despite all the evidence, they reject recognizing that this is an occupation launched by a settler colonial power that seeks to ethnically cleanse an entire indigenous population in order to solidify and legitimate its colony. What is happening in Gaza is incremental genocide, not a security operations. And yet Palestinians are being asked to give into a slow death, die aimlessly, showing no form of rebellion, and accept that if they die resisting, then it would be their own fault. The question is on Palestine's minds is why is that allowed to happen? 27 years after the fall of the apartheid regimes of South Africa, we know why Israel is doing it. We are the unwanted going, the refugees whose very existence is a constant reminder of the original sin committed in 1948. The premeditated crime of ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. It is worth mentioning that 2/3 of Gaza residents are refugees entitled to their right of returns as a stipulated in United Nations General Assembly Resolution 194. In Gaza, we know that Israel is going to get away with it simply because it has never been held to account for any of the massacres it has committed. We also know that it is going to commit more and worse crime. The United Nations, the European Union, the Arab League, the so-called international community at large have failed to Palestinian people and will continue to do so. The question is, what more do people who love freedom need to see in terms of death and destructions to translate their words of support into actions? What more than the dead bodies of hundreds of Palestinian children? No child, whether Jews, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, or any of other religions, should see what Palestinian children are saying right now. Palestinians will no longer accept dictates of the so-called international community, which continues to favor Israel and cover up its war crimes. In the light of the great sacrifice made by our people, any talk of merely improving the conditions of our oppressor is betrayal of the Palestinian victims of Israeli war crimes, who do not want crumbs. We want to return to our land and we want to live in them with our full right under international law. It is the ethical responsibility of every single person who believes in freedom for all to make sure that genocide and apartheid do not happen again. This is why we say now that boycott, divestment, and sanction against Israel is the responsibility not only of civil society organizations but of every single individual. This is what we can all do. We can boycott Israeli goods and Israeli institutions, divest from Israeli business, and demand sanctions on the Israeli government. Gaza could be the spark that initiates a different Palestine between the Jordan rivers and Mediterranean in the heart of the Middle East. The current uprising in the West Bank and Palestine's town in Israel could be the birth pains of a new reality characterized by the end of the racist two-state solutions and the establishment of a secular democratic states on the historic land of Palestinians, an inclusive state like South Africa. Let the Gaza war in 2009 be like South Africa's 1960 Sharpie Valley massacre, in which white apartheid police opened fire on unarmed black protesters, triggering a movement that brought down apartheid. Let the 2021 massacre in Gaza be the beginning of a new, more democratic Middle East with a secular, democratic state of Palestine that treats all its citizens equally, regardless of religions, race, and gender. So, in these situations, in future, two-state solution is possible or not, time will say.